Hi, I'm Jess Heagren, CEO and founder of flexible working platform That Works For Me. I'm going to talk to you today about what I think the coronavirus has taught businesses about flexible working. I'm going to talk about what's happened, what the impact's been, and what happens next. Before I do that, I want to talk to you a bit about who I am and why I care. 6 years ago, I had my first daughter. I worked for one of the biggest insurers in the UK, and I'd worked my way up through business development, projects, program management, strategy, eventually moving into a leadership role in their commercial division. When I left to have Molly, I was director of strategy and distribution. I had 600 people working for me all over the UK, and I was responsible for all of their major commercial relationships as part of my board level role. I'd set up the diversity committee for the whole group and led the gender and working family strand, often talking to the main board about employee diversity and how to improve it with initiatives like flexible working. I went back to work 5 months after I had Molly on an agreed 4-day week. In practice, I was doing 6 days in 4. I was on calls from 7 till 7. I was driving all hours of the day, and my precious Fridays when I was supposed to be with the baby were often spent lurking outside the baby sensory room with the phone pushed to my ear. I didn't see my baby from Monday to Thursday. When I fell pregnant with my second child, I knew something had to give. The inevitable happened, and I felt compelled to leave. 8 months later, I had 2 babies, and for the first time in my life, I didn't have a job. I didn't know what to do with myself. During that time, I met more and more people like me. I met mums, dads, sometimes grandparents, people who had discarded their big career all because they couldn't fit a 9-to-5 model. It came to a head one day when I met with a friend who'd been a marketing director for a well-known alcohol company. She was toying with working in her local Majestic Wine a couple of days a week just to get out of the house. I remember walking back from her home, stomping angrily on the pavement, and just thinking, what sort of world did we live in where people were being forced to cast aside all of their hard-earned skills just because they had children? The answer came a few weeks later when I was speaking to an incredibly talented friend of mine who runs a successful catering company in London. She'd nearly gone bust because her 2 junior finance person was reporting her cash flow wrongly. I asked her why she didn't have a CFO. I can't afford one, I don't have enough work, lots of excuses. But then I had my light bulb moment. I suggested she recruit a mum or someone really experienced who only wanted a few days' work a month. It would give her the senior experience she needed and her new CFO the hours and fulfillment they wanted. And so That Works For Me was born. It took a while, but with my best friend and my sister, we launched a flexible working platform that brings together skilled professionals wanting flexible or less than full-time work with growing businesses in need of experience and expertise. We launched shortly after I had my 3rd baby, and now we have a couple of thousand members and are growing all the time. But today is not about That Works For Me. Today I'm here as a flexible working advocate, and I want to talk to you about how that's been influenced by recent events. So, what's happened? For many years, employers have been talking to us about why they can't do flexible working, even though 87% of us want it. It's estimated that 40-something of us have it, but only 15% of job adverts advertise it. So there's a massive mismatch. Employers have cited many reasons: technology, infrastructure, culture, management, so many other things that have stopped them supposedly introducing flexible working. I saw it as my job to fix it. I had this dream, I had this vision of waking up one day and some sort of work revolution would have happened and everyone would be offering flexible working. I dreamt of people coming and going as they needed, video calls happening across the most unlikely of sectors, children being picked up from school by their parents, older people having visitors every day. I was dreaming big. And then COVID-19 happened. It was so far from what I envisaged. It was definitely not the work revolution I had dreamt of. I never foresaw people having to work under these circumstances, shrouded in stress and fear and illness. And most importantly, for so many people, there's zero childcare. I didn't anticipate employers with employees experiencing flexible working for the first time without the right tools, with zero training and no opportunity to build trust and good working practice. I didn't see freelancers being stretched beyond their limits, those precious few hours they used to squeeze in work now being used for homeschool, forcing them to work from 7 p.m. till midnight maybe. That's assuming the kids actually go to sleep, of course. But this is what has happened. Everyone has been forced to work from home, and we find ourselves now in a situation that we're calling flexible working and working from home. But just to be clear, it's neither of those things. What's happening now is that we're cramming in care, education, health, and work into even less time than we had before. We're exhausted, we're tired, we feel like failures, and we're being forced to making decisions that we didn't want to make, like sending our children back to school. The worst part of it all is that we're labelling it wrongly. We're calling it what we wanted when it's not what we wanted or how we wanted it. But, and there's a big, big but here, what we have been given is one massive leap forward. We've been given the opportunity of businesses doing a lot of the things that we wanted them to do to make flexible working happen. And that is the step forward. So what's the impact of this thing coronavirus has given us? Well, it means that companies have been forced into facilitating remote and flexible working. It's not always being done in the prettiest of ways, but it is happening. Social distancing and bans on travel have meant that people have had to work from home or not work at all. And in some respects, this is great. The realisation that a desk-based 9 to 5 isn't actually an imperative to getting the job done is a huge shift in mindset, and one that might never have been trialled on this scale in real life if we hadn't been forced to. So it has forced change. The impact on businesses is that working practices have changed. It's forced infrastructure changes that might never have made it up the IT work stack. It's tested business continuity plans in a way that we would never have done. And businesses have had to quickly adopt tools that would have taken ages to roll out otherwise. Slack, Trello, Zoom, things that freelancers and the flexible working community have been using for a really long time and now being used like never before. And these are all huge positives. They're great. Businesses are hopefully realising that their goals can be achieved when people aren't sat looking at each other. But culturally, I think we have a long way to go. Most people will know that a change isn't truly embedded unless the culture around it is right, and I think we've got quite a way to go on this front. I mean, I've heard some terrible stories. I've heard of things like 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. video calls, labelled check-ins to make sure that things are going okay. I've heard of back-to-back video conferences all day long. People being forced to keep their cameras on all day for a video chat so it feels like we're in the office. For workers, this always-on mentality is exhausting. They can't say no to client meetings at lunchtime. Where have they got to go? They can't leave their homes. They can't say no. People in close-knit businesses are on their laptops 12 hours a day because half the staff have been furloughed and the ones that are still in are picking up the slack. There are so many issues with this: burnout, exhaustion, just destroying culture. The key one, though, is that real lack of trust between manager and employee. And trust is instrumental to the success of flexible working. My worry is that this style of helicopter management will continue, and the lack of trust will damage those relationships longer term. Managers don't know how to manage remotely, and when someone's pushed into something that they don't know how to do, they often overcompensate by checking and furrowing through the detail. I worry that longer term employees won't be brave enough to push back on these 12-hour days that they've been forced into when if life goes back to normal. Will they be demanding enough to ask for that vacancy that was out before to support them? Will they be demanding enough to refuse to go back to 8 a.m. meetings and 5 p.m. meetings that everyone's become so accustomed to? Is it really up to them to push back, though? The reality is that employers need to take a long, hard look at whether they've got the right practices in place to support their new approach to flexible working. I think the sensible and employee-conscious businesses will take a look at whether they've got the right practices in place, and when they haven't, they'll call in the expert. They'll make that cultural shift that they need to make around this. It will take time, but they will get there. Unfortunately, I don't think that will happen for everyone. Financially, I think things look a little bit bleak in the short term. I mentioned earlier that I, in a previous life, worked in projects and strategy for a large corporate, and I know only too well that projects have to be paid for. These expensive and last-minute infrastructure changes will have to be paid for, and unfortunately at a time when profitability and income are a real challenge for businesses. That doesn't mean that everyone will be made redundant, and please don't walk away from that hearing it. But it does mean that in some industries where a business has successfully carried on with only half of the number of heads, it's inevitable that the CFO asks whether they actually need those additional people. And I worry about what that looks like for employment rates going forward. But the good news is that flexible working, when it's done properly, brings about real financial positives. People working from home will hopefully prompt the question as to why companies are holding these huge, great big buildings on their asset registers. I suspect we'll probably start to see buildings in cities emptying, if they'll certainly be shrinking. But what happens over the next year will certainly be interesting to see. I think that things will change for the better in the long term, but I'm worried that this forced and unplanned approach in the short term means we have got some difficult hurdles to overcome. The impact on people. This one is the most interesting to me. So what has people's experience of remote and flexible working been over the last few months? If I were to make predictions, I suspect that this has probably been the hardest for the busy boardroom types. They'll be missing their suits, they'll be missing their coffees, their PAs, and maybe family life isn't quite suited to that carefully cultivated persona they've spent all of these years building. In my experience, they're the ones that struggle with not having everyone there in the office at their beck and call all the time. This is a worry for flexible working going forward, because it's these guys, unfortunately, that have the power to change things in the long term. I really hope that they listen to their people, and if you are one of these people I'm describing, I urge you now to step up and listen. I really hope that they're brave enough to go back to the office as the humans they were when their toddler wandered in halfway through a meeting saying that they needed their bottom wiped, but hey, we'll see. For everyone else, I think flexible working is a matter of taste. Certainly, I really enjoy it, but my business partner absolutely hates it. She's desperate to get back into the office. And I think lots and lots of people will have learned a lot about themselves over the last few months. I predict that it's having control over your own time and the ability to prioritise your own life is the thing that matters the most. And that's what motivates people the most too. I hope that most people, in particular the dads who in the past have been out from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m, will not think that this is what it's like to work from home. That working among the chaos of homeschool, tantrums and Peppa Pig at volume 75 is what flexible working means, because trust me, when the kids are at school, it doesn't have to look like that. Hopefully they'll finally realise that while that text at 6 p.m. sends us into an absolute rage, you know, the one that says, oh, I'm still in the pub, just leave the dinner in the oven. And that's why we often consume our bottle at half long before bedtime begins. Not all of us. Last week, I had a director of a company that we work really close with declare that it's so nice to see my wife during the week. Men and women are seeing their babies in waking hours more than 2 days a week for the first time. Children are coming to them for cuddles when they fall over. You know, things are happening that are really making a difference to family life. I think that in the short term, there might be a short surge in divorce, but hopefully once that comes back down, that exposure to the reality of home life and just being around each other more can only be a good thing for stay-at-home caregivers. I think we'll be better and happier people. I really hope that the people who've been the victims of this, the ones that have missed out on important updates because the business didn't have time to update them or they missed them out on a meeting, that they'll understand that that's poor tools. That's not a product of flexible or remote working. I hope that anybody with a commute longer than 30, 40 minutes will have learned that isn't it better time spent exercising or with your children, visiting your mum and dad, walking the dog, whatever it is that makes you happy. I think anything has to be better for our physical and mental health than sitting on a packed train and hailing everyone else's morning breath. And I really hope that the thing that comes out of this is that we all learn that flexible working is better for us in the long term. What happens next? If, like me, you've seen a number of companies come out and talking about their change in policy, fantastic. Nestle, Twitter, some of the big utility firms, they're all talking about how working from home is going to be their new norm. And when we overcome these short-term hurdles that I've talked about, the financial ones, the cultural ones, when business actually start to realise the financial benefit of all of this, I think we'll see more and more companies making this their norm. I hope that companies and individuals alike turn this crisis into the positive that it can be for the sake of people everywhere, not businesses, people. This is an opportunity like no other we've ever been given. And I urge every individual, regardless of sex, age, rank, family situation, just not to push on how this can be reversed, but to push on how it can be adapted. What are the positives we can take? What are the negatives we take? What do we need to turn around to really make this work? What does it mean for you? Well, if you're a manager, listen and listen good. When all of this comes to an end, listen to your people, hear what they've liked, hear what they haven't liked. Don't jump straight to the balance sheet. Figure out a way of giving that 87% of people who want flexibility in their life a way of giving it to them. What worked, what didn't? What did you learn? Be the manager that makes your employees happy. You've got a really incredible power right now. For everyone else, now is the time to be having conversations. If you're employed, be that representative of your colleagues. Be the one that talks about how to get the culture around flexible working right. Talk about the positives. Demonstrate how much happier people are. It might take some time to get there where you get the balance right, but it can be done. Get other people to do the same. Demonstrate how you're still a community and you don't have to be sat looking at each other to work together. Be the one to affect that longer term change. If you're currently out of work, don't feel beaten by all this negative talk. Now is as good a time as any to put the feelers out. And actually, you're in a real advantaged position at the moment that if you're looking for flexible working, you can ask all the questions you want to. You can be upfront, you can be honest, you can talk about what you want, your commitments that you have. I've always said that people get a much better feel for who you are anyway when you talk about what's going on outside of your working life. Talk about the additional skills that those things bring you. Talk about your commitments. I always talk about how my children gave me so much more empathy as a manager. They made me so much more efficient. They clarified what exactly I wanted out of life. I'm a much more focused individual as a result. In fact, there's a book called The Squiggly Career written by Helen Tupper and Sarah Ellis, and it has a fantastic chapter on how to turn your negatives into a positive. If you see them as a negative, there's always a way of turning that around. If you're thinking of moving to a different company, again, this is an absolutely brilliant time to be talking about flexible working. Ask the questions. What time do people start and finish? What happens if there's a school concert? How many board members have families? What time do they start? What time do they leave? Ask about maternity and paternity packages. How well do the teams know each other? How many people work from home? How do the teams keep in touch? What tools do you have available? Do they use Trello, Slack, Teams, Hangouts? You can actually engage how well embedded flexible working is with these questions. Do your research. Are they transparent about pay scales? What's the gender pay gap? Or what does the board look like? Again, all of these are indicators for how well flexible working works in these organisations. Keep asking throughout your interview. Ask about examples of where people, what you know about people and what the interviewer knows about people. Obviously, balance this. You don't want to be the person that's obsessing over how much they stay at home, but there is absolutely a time and a place in an interview, in a conversation with another company about when you can make that work. And if you don't get the answers you want, I would urge you to question whether that's a company you really want to work for. A company that for me doesn't acknowledge my 3 young children, my self-employed husband, and has an all-white 50+ male boardroom table, it's just not somewhere that I would want to work. I would urge you to prioritise the same where you can. We live in a world now where people have multiple careers, and I think that career for life just doesn't exist anymore. Businesses accept and are starting to accept more and more that people have lives outside work, and that's okay. You need to remember that there are multiple benefits of flexible working, not just for you, but for the companies that you work for and you work with. It gives companies a much broader access to a wider recruitment pool. It's better for their employer brand. Their people are more motivated. Employee diversity is better. Productivity is better. All the benefits are there in black and white. It's just a case of whether companies choose to listen to them. Flexible working is not a thing that pain in the arse mums ask for anymore. It's something that mainstream companies have to offer. And what coronavirus has done has bring this into the limelight and given us the microphone that we need to talk about it. So there it is. Flexible working is and should be our new norm. It's here to stay. The evidence is out there. There's so much we can do with it. Use today's circumstances and use what's happened to make it more relevant to you. Have the conversations with your employers, have the conversations with your employees. It's not going anywhere. You've got choices over how to make this work for you. And I strongly believe if we all pursue the dream of work to live, then one day it will be a reality. Thank you.